I'm truly concerned that she will stop at nothing to dig her way out of the problems, including murder.
Ms. Shabiznis had blood on her hands when she was arrested.
Blood on your hands here, blood on your hands.
Money, power, and sex. That's what this case is about. The defendant, Lori Vallow Daybell, used money, power, and sex, or the promise of those things, to get what she wanted.
What were you doing?
Yelling, crying,
And why were you crying?
because I found my husband dead.
He asked us to call the police, so he's very afraid.
So this is Wisconsin versus Jesse Krzyzewski. Said otherwise, this is a case of murder, greed, and lies.
2023 saw highs and lows in the true crime world, from shocking arrests to monumental verdicts. Throughout it all, Law&Crime Network brought you the latest developments in the true crime world, where majority of the defendants are male. But women made their mark too, with a handful of arrests, trials, and even an acquittal. We're taking a look now at the top female defendants of the past year and a look ahead at what's to come.
Do you know how much money the defendant got in insurance payouts?
$1.3 million, a little bit more than that, $1.3 million in June of 2022.
We begin in Utah with a shocking case of Kouri Richins, the mother accused of murdering her husband and later writing a children's book about how to deal with grief.
To say it's accidental, 1 or 2 pills might be accidental. 20 or 5 times the lethal dose is not accidental, Your Honor. That is someone who wants Eric dead. And the person who benefited the most from Eric being dead is the defendant.
On March 4th, 2022, Eric Richins died after he was found unresponsive. Investigators later determined he had a lethal amount of fentanyl in his system. They also determined the drug was illicit rather than prescribed. Leading up to his death, authorities say Kouri Richins took out multiple life insurance policies on her husband. These instances date back to 2015. By 2020, Eric Richins allegedly told a friend he believed Kouri was trying to poison him after he had a bad reaction to a sandwich she'd made him. Eric said he broke out in hives, struggled breathing, and even had to use his son's EpiPen. This March, Richins published Are You With Me?, a children's book about how to deal with grief. But just months later, on May 8th, Richins was arrested and charged with aggravated murder and possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute.
Since Eric's death, it has come to our attention that Kouri took out multiple life insurance policies on Eric without his knowledge. It appears that she forged his signature on various documents, assigned herself as Eric's durable power of attorney, inappropriately diverted money from his business to herself, and assigned herself as beneficiary of Eric's portion of our mother's retirement account. I should also not forget to mention the multiple life insurances she has taken out on the boys. Her most recent business venture was authoring a children's book about how to help grieving children.
At a pretrial hearing on June 12th, a Utah judge heard from Eric Richins' sister, who alleged Kouri would benefit financially from her husband's death.
Kouri was in a desperate financial situation when Eric was killed, and that situation seems even worse now. We understand that she has defaulted on loans and is already a defendant in other lawsuits based on her financial misdeeds.
The judge also heard testimony from case investigators who spoke with a witness referred to as CL, who facilitated the purchase of fentanyl.
In our interviews, CL told us that in early 2022, the defendant reached out to her either by phone call or text message requesting that she procure fentanyl for what the defendant reported was an investor who had a back injury.
And upon the defendant asking CL to get fentanyl, what did CL do?
CL told us that she reached out to an acquaintance of hers, acquaintance 1, and requested that she introduce her to somebody that could sell her fentanyl.
Did acquaintance 1 introduce CL to someone that could sell CL fentanyl?
Yes, CL said that acquaintance 1 provided her with a phone number of another acquaintance, acquaintance 2, who was someone that she knew could sell CL fentanyl.
And did CL say that she ultimately contacted acquaintance 2?
Yes, she did.
What, if anything, did CL say about purchasing fentanyl from acquaintance 2?
CL told us that she contacted acquaintance 2 after receiving his phone number and asked to arrange to meet to purchase some fentanyl from him. She stated that sometime in February she believed she met up with acquaintance 2 at a Maverick gas station in Draper and purchased from him 15 to 30 round green-blue pills, which she understood to be fentanyl.
But according to Eric Richins' longtime friends, he was not an illegal drug user.
That you spoke to include Eric's 2 best friends that he's known since high school?
Yes, both made the same statement, that they never knew Eric to use any illicit substances other than the THC gummies.
On the night Eric Richins died, did investigators search the Richins home?
Yes.
Did they find any illicit drugs?
No.
Did they find any paraphernalia or packaging or other evidence of illicit drugs?
No.
Did they find fentanyl anywhere in the home?
Only that which was in Eric's body.
A forensic accountant also testified about the life insurance policies taken out in Eric Richins' name.
What was the amount of money that Eric's life was insured for at the time of his death?
About $1.2 million, aside from the business buy-sell policy.
In the end, a judge ruled Kouri Richins would not be released on bail as she awaits her upcoming trial.
The court determines as a matter of law that in the case of a capital felony that is supported by substantial evidence, while a defendant does not have a right to bail, the defendant may nonetheless still request bail, and the district court has discretion to grant bail if the circumstances warrant doing so. But the circumstances of this case weigh soundly against granting pretrial release of any kind.
In November, a judge denied a motion from Richins' defense to dismiss the case. This comes after the defendant was accused of witness tampering in the so-called walk the dog letter. The 6-page letter was found in Richins' jail cell back in September. It was written to her mother with instructions for her and Richins' brother to testify falsely. In the letter, Richins instructs the pair to say Eric Richins was getting drugs and pills from Mexico. The letter is headlined with the phrase, "walk the dog." Right now, there's no set date for Richins' jury trial.
My gosh, you guys, having kids is so much fun.
2023 saw another Utah mom in hot water, along with her controversial business partner, when they were both charged with aggravated child abuse.
911, the address of your emergency. Tell me exactly what's happened.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. We know there's been problems at this neighbor's house. He's emaciated, he's got tape around his legs, he's hungry, and he's thirsty.
Back in August, the son of YouTuber Ruby Franke broke free from duct tape shackles and ran for help in Ivins, Utah. The shocking 911 call captures the moments after the boy ran to a nearby house for help.
And he asked us to call the police. So he's very afraid. This kid has obviously been, I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds. We need the cops here as soon as possible.
Franke first gained national attention on the now-defunct YouTube page 8 Passengers. Once boasting more than 2 million followers, the page chronicled the lives of Ruby Franke, her husband Kevin, and their 6 kids. Even then, her parenting styles drew criticism from viewers.
And my kids are literally starving. I hesitate to say this because it's going to sound like I'm like a mean barbarian, but I told the kids, I said, I'm not even going to let you eat breakfast until you get your chores done.
Franke also collaborated with Jody Hildebrandt, the founder of a therapy group called Connections.
Anytime you think I want, fill in the blank, I don't care what it is, that is not love. Love is a gift that you offer because you have generated it inside yourself. And how do you generate love? Well, the only way to generate love is you use your agency to choose principles of truth.
In August, Franke's son escaped from Hildebrandt's Ivins, Utah home. Both Franke and Hildebrandt were taken into custody and later charged with 6 counts of aggravated child abuse each. Heading north now to Idaho, where half of the so-called doomsday cult duo, Lori Vallow Daybell, is tried on multiple counts of murder, including for the death of 2 of her children.
Tylee, JJ, and Tammy can't tell us what happened, but their bodies do.
It's a case that true crime enthusiasts have been following since before the pandemic. The case gained national attention in 2019 when 16-year-old Tylee Ryan and 7-year-old JJ Vallow were reported missing. They were last seen in September of that year, but hadn't been seen by their extended family in months. The story continued to gain traction when their mother, Lori Vallow, refused to turn the kids over to the authorities. Instead, she flew to Hawaii and married Chad Daybell, a religious extremist. On top of that, Chad Daybell's wife, Tammy, had just died 2 weeks prior. In February 2020, Vallow Daybell was arrested in Hawaii and extradited back to Idaho on charges of desertion of her children. But in June 2020, Tylee and JJ's remains were found buried on Chad Daybell's property.
What did you observe?
They scraped away some more soil around that round object, and it began to take the shape of the crown of, it looked like the crown of a head protruding through the dirt.
Okay. What action was taken next?
We continued, or they continued to dig around that, what we started to call the burial site, and eventually exposed what appeared to be a small body wrapped in black plastic.
Ultimately, both Lori and Chad Daybell were charged in the first-degree murders of Tylee Ryan, JJ Vallow, and Tammy Daybell. The court proceedings had many twists and turns, though, including the decision to sever the trials, meaning Lori and Chad Daybell would not be tried together. Court dates were pushed off due to Lori's competency, and eventually, cameras were banned from the courtroom. When Lori's trial finally began on April 11, 2023 in Boise, Idaho, only audio recordings were permitted.
Money, power, and sex. That's what this case is about. The defendant, Lori Vallow Daybell, used money, power, and sex, or the promise of those things, to get what she wanted. What she wanted was money, power, and sex. It didn't matter what obstacles she had to remove to get what she wanted. It didn't matter if the obstacle was a thing or a person. And if it was a person, it didn't matter who. Tylee Ryan was a vibrant young woman, 17 years old, a whole life ahead of her. She was just about to enter into adulthood and make her own way in the world. Who knows what she would have become. Tylee had already lost her father, and she received Social Security benefits because of that. Tylee had money. Lori wanted it. Tylee's gone. Joshua Jackson Vallow, lovingly known by friends and family as JJ, was a 7-year-old, vibrant, happy-go-lucky little boy. He had most of his childhood and his whole life ahead of him. But JJ was tough. He's a 7-year-old. He took a lot of time and effort and energy to care for. That time, effort, and energy took away from the defendant doing what she wanted to do, and from the defendant being with Chad Daybell and devoting her time and attention to him.
The evidence will show that once Lori and her friends met Chad Daybell, an author on religious subjects, her beliefs began to morph and to change. And that's where you come into this story, because the stories diverge. So we haven't been able to agree on what happened, and we need you to decide it. So what happened? How did these children die? Who was involved? When did it happen? Where did it happen? Why? Why did it happen?
During the trial, jurors heard from those who knew Lori best, including her one-time best friend, Melanie Gibb. She explained how Lori changed after meeting Chad Daybell, adopting new religious beliefs.
Did Lori ever indicate anything about having a special mission here on Earth?
Yes.
And what did she tell you about that?
She felt that she was part of the 144,000, and then as she developed her relationship with Chad, she felt like they were the head leaders of it.
And when you talk about the 144,000, can you explain a little bit about what that would mean?
It's reference from Scripture and the Bible and the Doctrine and Covenants about a group of 144,000 that would be here during the return of our Savior, and they would help do a great mission of missionary work throughout the world. And they would have, a lot of a spiritual endowment from on high.
So if someone were to be the head of that 144,000, would that be a pretty high calling?
Absolutely.
Would that be a position of pretty significant power?
Yes.
Prosecutors say that together, Chad and Lori believed some people were possessed by zombies and needed to be taken out. They say that's what happened in the case of Tylee and JJ and Lori's fourth husband, Charles Vallow, who was shot and killed by her brother, Alex Cox, back in 2019. According to Gibbs' testimony, Lori and Chad claimed Charles Vallow was possessed by a zombie spirit.
The physical body is still alive.
Correct.
And another entity or spirit is in that body.
Correct.
Do you recall what she told you regarding if the other spirit, the evil spirit, the entity is cast out of the body, what would happen to the body?
So the first time they thought they were able to cast out this first spirit that took over Charles's body, whose name was Ned. When that spirit left, so they weren't sure how it worked. And so after they believed Ned left, then they would see that Charles was still alive. And then they would come up with another idea that maybe another spirit, and then they come up with another name that spirit was the one that took over his body.
After multiple weeks of testimony, both sides presented closing arguments.
Tylee, JJ, and Tammy can't tell us what happened, but their bodies do. You heard testimony about the testing that was done on Tylee. One, they had to do DNA testing just to identify her because she was too broken up and too dismembered. You heard Dr. Christensen and Mr. Halapaska talk about puncture wounds in her pelvis. How those wounds were not the wounds of dismemberment. They're separate wounds in her pelvis. JJ Vallow, gagged and bound. Tammy's body, bruises consistent with restraint. Homicide by asphyxiation.
She wanted to be with Chad. They were obviously having an affair. Chad told her all the time about dark and light things. But there was no plan by Lori to kill her kids, or else she wouldn't have done that. Did she lie about it? Yeah, she did. When people started showing up, hey, where are your kids? And notice that she lied. Well, they're in Arizona. Well, they're with Grandma. They're at a movie. That's right, they're at a movie. Frozen 2. All lies. So why was she doing that? To protect Chad, her lover, her eternal in how many worlds?
After less than 7 hours of deliberation, jurors returned a verdict.
Verdict. We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn to try the above entitled action, for our verdict, unanimously answer the questions submitted to us as follows. Question number 1. In regards to count 1 of the amended indictment, is Lori Noreen Vallow not guilty or guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Tylee Ryan and grand theft by deception? Answer, guilty. Question number 2. In regards to count 2 of the amended indictment, is Lori Noreen Vallow not guilty or guilty of first-degree murder of Tylee Ryan? Answer, guilty. Question number 3. In regards to count 3 of the amended indictment, is Lori Vallow not guilty or guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Joshua Jackson Vallow and grand theft by deception? Answer, guilty. Question number 4. In regards to count 4 of the amended indictment, is Lori Vallow not guilty or guilty of first-degree murder of Joshua Jackson Vallow? Answer, guilty. Question number 5. In regards to count 5 of the amended indictment, is Lori Vallow not guilty or guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Tammy Daybell? Answer, guilty. Question number 6. In regards to count 7 of the amended indictment, is Lori Vallow not guilty or guilty of grand theft? Answer, guilty.
In July, Lori was given consecutive life sentences without parole. She's since been extradited from Idaho to Arizona, where she faces 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Charles Vallow. Chad Daybell is still awaiting trial in Idaho for the murders of JJ, Tylee, and Tammy.
This is Wisconsin versus Jesse Krzyzewski.
Switching now to Wisconsin, where a Milwaukee area woman is convicted in the death of her longtime friend.
They kind of weren't sure. We didn't know if it was a suicide or if it was something medical. She was in the hospital shortly before. She'd been sick for years. We really weren't sure, if this is something, because the doctors could never figure out what was going on. Mm-hmm. So it was frustrating, and she had literally probably 10 boxes of medical documents.
Back in 2018, Jesse Krzyzewski called 911 saying she'd found the body of her friend, 62-year-old Lynn Hernan. Jesse Krzyzewski herself described it as a caretaker relationship to police, saying she took care of Hernan's medical issues.
I was there all the time, taking care of her. I'm the one who took her to the doctor. I'm the one who did everything. So it bothers me because I go, could I have been there? Could I have helped? Could I have done something? That's my hardest part. Mm-hmm. I've never found anybody before, and it's not something I ever want to do again.
First responders on the scene found Hernan with, quote, a large amount of crushed medication on her chest. For months, investigators thought she'd overdosed, but by 2019, they learned Hernan's cause of death was actually a fatal dose of tetrahydrozoline, which is the main ingredient in eye drops. After a murder investigation, Krzyzewski was arrested in 2021 and charged with intentional homicide. Krzyzewski's trial began on October 24th.
This is Wisconsin versus Jesse Krzyzewski. Said otherwise, this is a case of murder, greed, and lies. The judge just read you the 3 counts. Of course, in the law, we call murder intentional homicide. And that's count 1. And it's a homicide or murder of Lynn Hernan. Count 2 is a theft of over $100,000 of Lynn Hernan. And those date ranges, January 1st of 2016 until October 3rd of 2018, really represent the theft while Lynn Hernan was still alive. And then count 3 is yet more theft, more greed, of theft of almost $87,000 from Lynn Hernan's estate from October 4th until July 9th of 2019, after her murder.
Krzyzewski's defense argued their client didn't kill Hernan, but rather loved her. They argued Hernan killed herself.
Lynn liked her vodka. And when she died on October 3rd, 2018, she had alcohol in her system. I'm not saying she's a bad person. She just liked that vodka. She also liked Visine. I have no idea why. Why somebody would put Visine in their alcohol or Visine in water. I don't know why people smoke marijuana. I don't know why people do heroin. I don't know why people do cocaine. I don't know why people do fentanyl. I don't get it. But people like doing that. That stuff doesn't make sense to me, why people want to put that in their body. Lynn liked to put Visine in vodka and water. Why? Who knows? I don't know. Lynn loved Jesse. That was her daughter. She was in that circle. But if Lynn was here, she wouldn't believe that Jesse's sitting over there to start with. Had she known this was going to happen, I think she would have did something different. Never in her wildest dream would she ever think Jesse would get arrested for a suicide that Lynn committed. or being charged with money that Lynn gave to her. Jesse's innocent.
During the trial, jurors heard from Krzyzewski herself in a recorded police interview.
You gotta lay it out. That morning you talked, you knew what her plan was.
I've known it for months.
And when you gave her that bottle, you were sick inside.
I was sick inside, but I didn't think I'd find her.
This was kind of going to happen.
Because
there was a good possibility this was going to happen.
Yes.
Because she was done.
Yep.
And you knew that.
But I can honestly say I did not know I was
and it was killing you.
The personal representative around the
that
world.
afternoon, you was still spinning in your head that you thought, I'm going to go back there, she might be dead. And you couldn't tell him because he's too good of a person.
No.
And you feel horrible. You feel horrible about all this.
Her last will at the house has Anthony and my mom on it. The last will that was at the house, just so you guys know, because you probably found it.
Mm-hmm.
It was there. I did not know that. I want that known.
Again,
my mom knew
from
too.
day one that you tried to help her. She was done. She was in such pain and such misery, and you did what you thought was right. It's that simple. You did what you thought was right. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And you feel horrible about it.
I don't even want to say it was right. I did what she wanted because she wanted it.
But you resisted a bunch of times
Oh,
before,
some of the
and
time.
she wore you down, and this time this was it.
If I would have thought this was right, I would have pulled the trigger and just shot her.
You can't do that. You're not that person.
Jurors also heard from experts about Hernan's cause of death.
What do you believe the cause of Lynn Hernan's death was?
It's my opinion that her death was due to mixed drug toxicity, and in that I would include the tetrahydrozoline, baclofen, ropinirole, alprazolam, hydrocodone, cyclobenzaprine, and nifedipine. And the reason I would include all of those, even though the levels that were found in her blood were not extremely high, is that many of these may have what's considered an additive effect or a synergistic effect. And in addition, because she had presumably stopped taking some of these medications for quite a while, the mere presence of them in her blood is suggestive to me of that she may have taken them in excess.
In closing, prosecutors again suggested Krzyzewski poisoned Hernan with eye drops.
There was only one poison in Ms. Hernan's toxicology, and it was eye drops, and they weren't on the scene. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the misleading scene that caused investigators from day one to believe this was a pill overdose was very intentional. It was intentional by the only person who was there other than Ms. Hernan. It was an intentional way to mislead. This theme of Ms. Krzyzewski's intent being to mislead will carry us through the rest of the discussion this morning. And the motive? To get out of trouble, right? Because what was presented by Ms. Krzyzewski to the first responders at the scene was not at all what the actual cause of death was. Ms. Krzyzewski talked about how ill Ms. Hernan had been, how she liked to use her pills. There's no suicide note.
The defense countered, saying Hernan sealed her own fate.
Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not a homicide. The state has not proven a first-degree intentional homicide. It's what everyone concluded on October 3rd, 2018. It was a suicide. And everyone who came to the scene on that day concluded it was a suicide. And they concluded it for a lot of reasons, including what you saw, which is a whole boatload of prescriptions that were laying around. Lynn was hoarded pills, and they were everywhere. Pills that were no longer prescribed to her. And the pills were found in her system. She took all those pills. And also, when the medical examiner did the evaluation of the stomach contents, pills were in there. It's what is called a polydrug overdose. When somebody takes too many pills, the combination together creates can create exactly what happened here.
Jurors soon returned a unanimous verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Jesse R. Kershevsky, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 1 of the information. Signed by the foreperson, juror number 24.
Kershevsky was scheduled to be sentenced in December, but ahead of that, her defense attorneys motioned to withdraw from her case. This after prosecutors say Kershevsky wrote a letter to a friend asking them to forge documents and pretend to be Hernan in a voice recording. That recording would have given Kershevsky an alibi. Also in Wisconsin, another case with a much different outcome.
Okay, what's going on? My husband is
That was a 911 call made by Lori Phillips, accused of a hit and run that left her husband dead in a snowbank. Phillips was charged with second-degree reckless homicide in June 2020 after the February 2019 death of her husband, Mark. Prosecutors say Phillips ran over her husband after a night of arguing. But when she took the stand, Phillips told her side of the story.
Lori, did you make it all the way to the garage when you went out looking for Mark?
No,
Why not?
because I saw my husband out of the corner of my eye.
How did you react to that?
I freaked out and I ran straight to him.
Lori, what were we hearing in that clip?
Me
What were you doing?
yelling, crying,
And why were you crying?
because I found my husband dead.
Is that the exact moment that you saw that Mark was out there?
Yes,
Lori, what did you do when you saw Mark laying out in the snowbank?
I ran to him.
And what did you see about or notice about Mark when you ran to him?
That he wasn't breathing. He wasn't alive anymore.
What led you to believe that he wasn't alive?
His hands were like purple. I could tell. It was obvious.
And how did you react to seeing Mark out there dead?
I mean,
Give me a minute.
How did I react? I was in disbelief. I was in shock. I just ran. Then I ran inside the house to go get my phone to call 911.
After several days of testimony, both sides presented closing arguments.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Ms. Phillips' actions show an acknowledgement and an understanding that she had a real good idea what happened in that driveway. Her behavior, what she did, how she did it, again, acknowledging what had happened, the checking the cameras, the making sure, the nuances in how the system is or isn't armed. All of that shows that Ms. Phillips knows. She has the acknowledgement of what had happened in that driveway. She knows that Mr. Phillips is in front of her. She knows that she took the F off. She knows that she did so because they were having an argument. She goes over him with her truck. She causes his death. That is unreasonable and it is substantial. It is unreasonable because it's not based on her need to flee, as she indicated. It is based on her anger. It is based on her being in the heat of the moment. It is based, and perhaps very probably, based on Mr. Phillips and the way he acted that night, that he mistreated her in some capacity is going to be undisputed.
There was never going to be a good outcome on February 22nd. There were only two possible outcomes, and they were both bad. It was a lose-lose game that Lori Phillips was forced to play. I told you at the very beginning of this case that this is the story of an ordinary woman in an impossible situation. A case where somebody was forced to react, and she reacted the best that she could in the few seconds that she had. Lori Phillips isn't perfect, but Lori Phillips isn't a murderer. It's often been said in the legal profession that accidents happen, but crimes are committed. This is not what we call a strict liability offense. The mere fact that somebody's dead is not a crime in and of itself. The difference here is on what the mindset was leading to the fatal injuries. And as Mr. Burdick noted, the state has several elements they have to prove. They have to prove actual physical cause. They have to prove that Ms. Phillips's conduct, not Mark Phillips's, but Ms. Phillips's conduct, created a substantial and unreasonable risk of his death or great bodily harm. They've got to prove the why. Was this so unreasonable under the circumstances that it constituted criminally reckless conduct? And finally, they have to prove knowledge at the time that she knew, not should have known, but knew that she, Lori Phillips, was creating a substantial and unreasonable risk of killing her husband.
But after only a few hours of deliberation, jurors returned a shocking acquittal.
State of Wisconsin versus Lori Phillips, La Crosse County case number 20 CF 364. Verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Lori Phillips, not guilty. Signed by the juror foreperson, dated this 10th day of November 2023.
Yet another female defendant came out of Wisconsin in 2023 in what may be one of the most shocking cases of the year.
I just didn't stop. I don't know why. I didn't stop. Because I felt bad because I'm like, damn, he's going to be the reason I did this. I'm like, might as well just kill it.
The case of Taylor Shabusiness captivated the nation when the Wisconsin woman was charged in the murder, dismemberment, and sexual assault of her former lover.
Tara had woken me up and said she thinks she found Chad, her son's, that's how she put it, I found my son's head in a bucket. So I'm dumbfounded. Didn't believe her. Thought she was having a mental issue or something.
There was a human head. There was genitalia in the bucket.
Let me stop you there. What do you mean genitalia?
What I would recognize as a penis and testicles.
The case gained attention from the start when the decapitated head and penis of Shad Therion were discovered in a bucket at the bottom of his mother's staircase. When investigators arrested Shabusiness, she had blood on her hands. In a police interview, she admitted to the murder and dismemberment, saying it was kinky sex that went wrong.
He put the chain on his neck. He thought that you guys were going to have kinky sex. Right? Do you think that's what Chad was thinking, maybe? Yeah. What were you thinking?
I was going to do the same thing. You know, I was going in, and I did. And I went in. But then he was like, choke me. But he didn't really say it, so I'm like, he put it on his neck. I already know I'm going to choke him. And I did.
Did she play with his penis?
Yes.
After he was dead?
Oh, yeah.
Was it erect?
It was half. It was half.
What did you do with this penis?
I put it on.
Did you ever place it in your vagina or any of your body parts?
No, I just...
You didn't use it as a dildo or anything? Okay. But when did you start, cutting up his body?
I don't know, like almost right away. I was sucking and cutting at the same time.
Shabusiness's case had several delays before it finally went to trial, including when she physically lashed out at her then attorney Quinn Jolly.
You went off on your attorney, Taylor. You went crazy on your attorney.
Eventually, though, the case went to trial in July. Jurors were tasked with 2 phases of the trial, determining whether Shabusiness was guilty and whether she was mentally competent at the time of the crimes. In the end, they returned back-to-back guilty verdicts.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Taylor Denise Shabusiness, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 1 of the information. Question 1. At the time the crimes were committed, did the defendant have a mental disease or mental defect? Answer, no.
Months later in September, Shabusiness appeared in court for a sentencing hearing. Victim impact statements ranged from colorful to shocking.
I just wanted to say that I forgive you for what you've done to my son. And, yeah, you made a bad choice, and now you have to live with it. But, I'm going to miss Shad. He was a wonderful child, too. Growing up, just mild-mannered and just happy. And I know you made a bad choice. And like I said, I forgive you. And I'm going to ask the judge if he can, if she can see the streets again sometime, It may not be soon, but I believe everybody makes bad choices, and maybe not to the scale, but I think there's a lot of hope for you. I think, you know, you can make use of your time and be a better person and do great things yet, you know, so it does no good for me to hate you, you know. I know you got a heart, I know you got a mind, and I wish you no harm.
To take the cowardly path that you did and to make other people suffer because you were suffering is pretty. So that name Taylor business fits you well. And I'm not a praying man, but after Judge Walsh here sentenced you today, I will pray that you meet the same fate as your idealistic Jeffrey Dahmer. So have a good life.
In the end, the most severe punishment was handed down.
Going to impose life imprisonment without the possibility of extended supervision. I believe that's appropriate in light of the findings that I've already made.
That was a look at the top female-driven cases we saw in 2023. As more true crime stories unfold, stay with Law&Crime Network for even more updates in 2024. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.